Flying cars feel like a concept straight out of a 1950s sci fi movie. But with Uber's announcement of their Uber Air service coming later this year, this technofuturism is much closer than we think. But as with all new technologies, there's growing pains. What are the physics behind this technology, and how would it actually be incorporated into everyday life? The questions to ask. So, welcome to BS, a podcast where we take an in depth look at different scientific and social phenomena and innovations whilst tying them back to broader societal perspectives and why you should care. We hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back, everyone, to a new episode of BS. We know that we're gracing your earbuds right now with our lovely voices, just singing tales of STEM fantasies that are apparently coming true. And now I guess we can finally report that flying cars are a new thing. Question mark, question mark, question mark. We'll get into that later. We'll get deeper into the weeds. But Gold, I first must start by asking you, what mode of transportation do you even prefer to get you from A to B?
Honestly, living in Atlanta feels like I have a gun to my head to say cars because there's
Oh.
really no, genuinely, risk your life. Try it if you must, trying to be a person who's a scooter, biker, and I'm not even doing all that. We don't really have respectable public transportation. So, I have to be in a car for it to be remotely reasonable. I think ideally, I'd like to be just a bus girly. I still don't really want to be out there just kind of raw when it's raining or something like that on a bike or a scooter, but I'm forced into a car.
Fair enough. The US really doesn't have robust public transportation just as a whole, but it's definitely better in some cities than others. And yeah, Atlanta is a mess. I constantly dream of all the things that MARTA could be and could have been. But I guess like crying over spilled milk with that one. For me, what mode of transportation do I prefer? I feel like I'm a subway girly. I like the subway. I feel like it's very chic, it's very cool, and it favors people who mind their business. And I just feel like those are all three things that I like to do. Like you just need it. It's pretty cheap in comparison to what do you call it? I feel like a lot of forms of transportation. I feel like there are always a million different subway routes around. I can speak mostly for Montreal because that's the city that I visited the most often with the subway system. But I feel like there's always a train coming within like 5 minutes. What do you call it? Everybody just minds their business for the most part. Like, yeah, are there always some people lurking on the track? Sure, but I don't know. I like the subway. I think the only thing that scares me about that is once again those weirdos who come up and try to push people off the tracks. That is where I'm like, oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But other than that, like, real cute, real chic.
And not that that doesn't even happen, but for some reason, you just kind of being hesitant, standing at the subway waiting for somebody to come is killing me.
I
I gotta
feel
be
like people who are walking up to like right where the turnstiles are and like being right like y'all are so much better than me because how many news article headlines do you need to read about somebody getting pushed by some random stranger to not do that? Like I get that we want to be close to the front guys and like I get that you want to get on the train, get a seat, get the window seat and like that's cool and everything, but I don't play like that. I'm short,
yeah,
okay? And I
at
don't
what
have good upper
cost?
body strength. I don't
At
have good
what
upper body strength to
cost?
climb out of the what do you call it? To climb out of the little ditch. The train is gonna get me. The train is gonna get me. Gold. Like
Okay, if I fell in there, you coming to get me? You reaching your hand in?
I would definitely help you within reason.
Right. Right.
I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm joking. No, I definitely come and get you. That'd be fake if I didn't. Like that'd kind of be crazy that I just let them push you in there and I just walked away. Like
No, honestly, I feel like I'm also a very fearful person of more so wild out there, things that could happen, types of things where you see when you read the news too much. But I think that's because of my mom. She is me times 10 when it comes to just like fearing the random thing that she saw on the news last night. Like, I don't even know how much I would have to pay my mom for her to get it to like an electric flying car. Like, I don't know if there's any money in the world that would get her to be like one of the first 100 people to do that, one of the first 1,000.
No, and that's fair enough. That's word to mom. I feel like, I think about the technology adoption curve a lot, especially I feel like as an engineer who a lot of the work I'm doing is very like novel and stuff like that. I always think about how it's like you have the like pioneers, the early adopters, you have the middle, which is like the when the majority of society kind of does it. Then you have like the late people, and then I think like the last one is like the skeptics, the critic, like the people who really wait to the tail end to adopt it. And I think with this technology, it's going to be very interesting to see where people fall. I will say though, like the technology itself isn't necessarily something super new to the masses. So that is one thing that it has going for it, is the fact that like people have been on airplanes before, people are familiar with helicopters, people are familiar with submarines and like just different types of transportation, either like in the air, in the water, on land. So like I feel like that's something humans, after a couple of centuries of getting used to stuff like this, have gotten primed for. I think it's more so just like, are people even gonna think it's worth it? And honestly, at the end of the episode, we'll let you guys decide, what you think. What is it worth it? Is it not? Like that's the thing about STEM innovation. Sometimes they're very cool. Sometimes we're like, is it ever going to be applied? Guiding research questions to think about as you're coming to your decisions. So 3 things we're going to talk about today. First, what are the physics behind eVTOLs, which we'll get into that acronym later. Second, what are the use cases for these vehicles? And finally, how are eVTOLs projected to incorporate into transportation networks? So, with that, Gold, how did you even pronounce? Like, I'm like, is it eVTOL? Is it eVTOL? Like, that's what I've been calling it in my head, like eVTOL. It's too long to say the full name, but
Yeah, I think when I first was reading about it or like talking about it, I was saying eVTOLs because anytime I'm new to an acronym, I do be saying like every single letter. Obviously, we're like kind of like used to the E in front of everything these days. Yeah, like as I continue to research, I was just saying eVTOLs in my head because, like, again, VTOLs is a bit much. Like, it's a bit much. And what eVTOLs or eVTOLs even are is electric vertical takeoff and landing aircrafts, and basically, like that is like a subsection of VTOLs in general that are fully electric. And they're usually called like air taxis or flying taxis because honestly, if you actually look at the like prototypes that Uber has on their website, that do not look like a car. But like I think the whole point is low-key function over form here, which is like I know not the way it's supposed to go, but I think they're still calling it a car because of the way that they want to use it for like short form and like kind of quick on the go travel. And usually there's two different types of eVTOLs. There's like fully electric and hybrid in the same way that we have e-vehicles that are fully electric and hybrid. And the fully electric ones just have an incredibly dense battery that helps power their electric motors, whereas the ones that are hybrid have a gas turbine that's connected to a generator that helps power their electric motors. And in turn, again, the propulsion for both of them.
yeah, no, they're what do you call it? Definitely, if you're thinking about a car or picturing that in your mind right now, expel that image because they're nothing like a car. They do not use the same method of transportation. Actually, what it would be more or better to compare them to would be helicopters, is kind of what I would consider to be their current direct competition. And they you kind of use electric propulsion to take flight. So, like Gold was saying, like using either fully electric or hybrid methods to power the motors on the eVTOLs. And the nice thing about them is that you can scale down the size of the motors. You can have a lot more of them, and you can rotate them at a much slower speed, making them quieter than a traditional helicopter. So that is kind of why they've emerged as an attractive option for urban air mobility as we go into the future. And there's also multiple different types of designs and different power sources that each kind of have. Obviously, with their pros and cons as it always goes. So the first kind is multi-rotor. This one I think is probably like the traditional one people are thinking of. So it has just multiple vertical rotors for takeoff, hover, cruise, and landing. Rotor literally just being like the thing that kind of spins around to propel you. And the thrust from the rotors actually eliminates the need for aerodynamic lift from wings. And so aerodynamic lift is probably the pressure mechanism that people are most familiar with in terms of like airplanes and traditional forms of air travel. So basically, what ends up happening, and listen, I was not a physics major, so listen, y'all, this is from what I could understand while researching, is that you have the wings of an airplane are designed in a specific way that the air on top moves faster and the air on the bottom moves slower, and this kind of pressure difference allows kind of like cruise. So it allows the aircraft to stay afloat. And there's a couple, once again, more physicky equations that go into it. I know it's governed by like Bernoulli's. I know it's governed by like what do you call it, Newton's laws of physics, and other equations that go into why it works. But basically, that pressure difference is helping to keep the aircraft afloat. But since this is just direct vertical thrust from rotors, it kind of eliminates that. However, because of that, it requires a lot of power, and so it's not energy efficient at all, and that means that it's limited to shorter, less complex missions, and that leads to range constraints. So a shorter range for like how multi-rotor eVTOLs can be used. Another kind is lift plus cruise, and so this one has the same concept of using vertical rotors for takeoff, hovering, and landing, but this time they have a separate propulsion system specifically for cruise flight, what I was talking about earlier with the aerodynamic lift. And cruise flight, once again, is traveling just at a constant altitude and speed, so it's going to take up the majority of the flight. Obviously, you have like takeoff, the actual flight, and landing. Vast majority is going to be that cruise flight, and so having a fixed wing on the lift plus cruise designs allows for aerodynamic lift. And so it's actually one of the more common designs for passenger and cargo movement because it just has a greater endurance, range, and efficiency. However, the cons of that is that you're starting to add more structural weight to these systems since you're having two different propulsion systems. And it just leads to more complexity, which you have to navigate between in flight. And finally, there's the tilt rotor or tilt wing. The pros of that is that you're conserving space by using the rotors for both vertical and horizontal lift, and towards cruise flight, and you physically are tilting the rotor from a vertical to a horizontal position. But the cons of that obviously is that if you're going to literally tilt rotors mid-air, you have to really make sure that you understand the mechanical complexity of that and make sure that there's a safe transition of the rotors during flight. And general challenges that eVTOLs across all of the different designs are kind of having is adding battery power without adding too much additional weight, because that is something that other forms of air travel kind of have on it, is that they're able to just have much, much, much higher battery powers, which allows them to go for greater range. And so across all designs, people are trying to think of ways to better kind of get the most juice out of the batteries without having to add too much weight, because then once again that kind of defeats the point of having a lightweight, durable urban option for shorter air travel.
Yeah, and honestly, it might sound complicated with all these pros and cons. So a lot of people are just like, okay, what is the use? Like, why are we even going towards like flying cars when we have like all of these other like modes of transportation? And I think they were supposed to fit like a quite like niche sector of wanting to like be able to fill like short distance trips and be used mostly in like cities for like urban air mobility. Like again, the flying taxi name kind of came from like someone needing to get from point A to point B quite quickly. And obviously with a lot of the urban areas, especially in the US and even in other countries too, that have kind of like that tough gridlock traffic at certain times of the day, and then also cargo delivery. And another one that I thought was very interesting is like emergency services, because I remember when I used to actually live on Emory's campus, like I used to always hear them choa helicopters, which sad, but like so like it's definitely something that they would have use of. And if you are in a city that has like terrible public transportation, like you have definitely seen the like EMS vehicle trying to get through gridlock traffic, and you're like, whoever this is for right now, I'm so sorry your city failed you. So I can definitely see it in that regard. Other more again areas could be like the ecotourism or the agriculture. So like I could definitely see Uber doing some kind of like hour flight across like random beautiful city, blah blah blah. Like I know their pockets line just hearing me say that sentence. I'm not even gonna lie.
No, they're already giggling and cackling. Like, don't
Yeah.
give them ideas.
And honestly, at least at this level, it's seeming like it's definitely being marketed for the most part as like a quote unquote premium experience. They even said like if it was on the app, it would be considered to be a premium experience, which is get ready to pull that money out, sister. Like,
No, literally. You can definitely see from the way that they're drawing up like the concept designs, the sketches, the way they're almost launching or marketing it to the public. Like, I definitely think they want broader consumer buy in, but there definitely seems to be a focus on making this a luxury elite thing. And, like, as with all technologies, we know that's probably going to be who it rolls out to first. But the thing about eVTOLs is that once again, much cheaper prices than a helicopter. So I've seen some people saying like it's gonna start out being the price of like an Uber Black, and then like go down to the price of like a what's like right below Black Gold. I'm literally blanking right
an
now.
X, an Uber X.
Yeah, like an Uber X or something like that. Just because once again it's so much more cost efficient. So it'll be interesting to see what the initial prices when it comes out to the market are, because it seems like they do kind of want it almost in that like middle class to upper middle class market is what they're targeting. Not necessarily for the super wealthy, but not necessarily for people who ain't got a little money in the pocket either. And we've gone into kind of like the physics behind it and kind of the use cases that have been proposed for these vehicles. But now that that's all said and done, like what is an eVTOL coming to your city? Well, that depends. There's a lot of different companies getting into the game right now in China and Europe, and a lot of companies in the US trying to do it. In fact, I think the Department of Transportation actually just announced a program where they like did different bids. I think over like 30 companies applied and 8 companies like won a spot. And so it's across a variety of different sectors. Some like the use cases that Gold was talking about was once again like passenger air taxis, cargo deliveries, EMS responses. And so there's definitely a push from the US government to try to get that off. But the next question really is how are eVTOLs projected to kind of incorporate into our current transportation networks? Because you can't just start flying them all over town. You know what I'm saying? Even though we want to beat that Atlanta traffic, there's still some regulation red tape that we got to cut through. First of all, certification of any sort of aircraft is an incredibly long and intensive process. Now, I am not an aerospace or mechanical engineer, and maybe I should have called up one of my friends before this episode to talk more about it. But when I was looking into some of these deadlines that people were setting about how long it takes to bring, you know, like commercial aircraft to market, I was like, Jesus, hey, like, what do you mean from conception? Like an Airbus insert model took like 10 years from like design or whatever to like actually get to market, and it was like 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. I mean, obviously I'm sure there's longer and shorter, but yeah, certification from the FAA is a very intensive process for good reason. Listen, I'm happy it's strict, you know. I don't want it to not be strict, but that is something to think about when we're thinking about the life cycle of when this product is even going to be available to consumers, because it's also new too. It's never been done before. There's no predecessor. So that means that there's going to be even more kind of caution, because you want to make sure that there are proper safety mechanisms in place in case something fails. You also have to think about the current infrastructure of what urban networks currently look like. There aren't just helipads on every building, you know, for eVTOLs to just land on. Currently, vertiports, which is what they would call where a eVTOL would land, or helipads would just need to be created in order to be able to accommodate this mode of transportation. And that can be difficult in already very packed metropolitan cities. Like, I know that there's constantly fights over like housing regulations, zoning laws, and also just like whenever space is available, like we know people are fighting tooth and nail for it because it truly is limited, and we know how much prices can skyrocket. So it's going to be interesting to see how like city councils and like city regulations are going to tackle that. Is it going to be like state jurisdiction, federal jurisdiction? Like, who is going to be in charge of figuring out where these things are supposed to go? Also, since they're electric, they are going to need to have like charging stations, which can also be very, very difficult to find because that's even more space that now needs to be accommodated. I also, this is a side note, but I never thought about where Waymos go to sleep. And then like somebody brought it up to me at lunch the other day, and I literally mind blown, and I just literally like chills down my spine. And then I looked it up and I was like, this is insane. Because I never thought they like, yeah, you're right. I guess they clock out of their shift to go charge. But I don't know. I thought they was just on the road all the time. Or I didn't really think about it, you know.
I don't even want to talk about my unnecessary hate for Waymos, but yeah, I did see something in like, was it San Francisco, where like the Waymos were kind of like honking at each other at
Yeah.
during their little sleep area, and they couldn't figure out for a while how to get them to stop doing that when they're not actually on the road.
Apparently it's supposed to be like a safety mechanism of like when a new car comes into the park, it like beeps, or like the other cars will beep to let them know like, hey, we're here. And then like I think it's just a echolocation method. And then also for any humans around, for example, like if your car is going and then it's like beeping, you know, like, oh, okay, there's like a foreign, object coming towards me. Still very annoying, and I would hate to live next to that car park, but
First of all, I remember one time like I was just out and this guy was trying to be funny and he was like blocking these people's Waymo from leaving. Girl, when I tell you that Waymo let out the loudest honk I and the longest honk I have ever heard, I was like, "Oh, y'all not playing." My bad. Like I was like, I kind of jumped a little bit. I was like, "Oh,
they said clear the era. Clear
clear
the
the
era.
air."
Clear the era. It's not funny.
But honestly, it's good that you bring up all of these like community things when it comes to how these vehicles are actually going to vehicles. How are they going to actually integrate into society? Because I feel like at the end of the day, when it comes to new technology, especially because like technology in this like at this scale is something that's already incredibly new to people. Okay, like there are people still alive who grew up like not having a phone in the house. Okay, so like this is definitely something that is definitely still integrating into society, and at the end of the day you're asking for people's money, so people are going to actually want your product if you're trying to not market it to a business or a conglomerate and market it to a human being and like a person. And
Never mind the safety angle, because like who's
never
using a
mind, because like you
computer?
got to win over people like my mom as well. And like I think the public perception of something like a flying vehicle, it has went both ways. Like honestly, surprisingly, there's a lot more people who are open to it than I was expecting. But like this also just kind of has to do with the data that I've seen. Like in the survey that I saw, they were interviewing people and surveying them from LA, Mexico City, New Zealand, places that definitely have a lot more like urban areas and people who have like dense urban populations who may be more open to something like this. I know they specifically chose Mexico City because it seems like they already use a lot of like private jets and things like that more than the average like dense populated city.
Okay, ballers.
Like, okay. I've always wanted to go to Mexico City, but that's like a whole other conversation. And then obviously they chose LA because I'm just like, big American city that does not have New York City level public transportation and definitely has people with the coins and the open mind for this to like be a legitimate option for them.
LA would be the perfect place to try this. I'm not gonna lie. Like,
Like I was like, okay, y'all ate with that. And they also interview people in Switzerland. I don't know. I That kind of sort of makes sense, I guess. But I feel like they seem more
shout out
logistical than us.
to
They'd be like, let's just up that public transportation. But hey, arrest me, that's me.
the
And it kind of went the way you would think it would go. I think a lot of people who already use ride shares, who already use public transportation, so people who are already kind of living their life in a way that is beyond like the single use like the one person car like gridlocked on the highway, they seem to be having a more like positive perception of possibly using like a flying vehicle. Obviously people who live in urban areas and who have longer commutes to work also had more positive perspective perceptions, because people are at the end of the day biased. Like when you have an issue that is bothering you day in, day out. Like you just have like the aura of desperateness on you to be more like open to solutions to that. Like,
The
so
aura
that
of
also made sense. Some of the biggest concerns was one, concerns about safety. And that's another reason why I like this survey specifically, is because they kind of gave scenarios for an eVTOL, and like people's perception of it kind of wavered by scenario.
Mhm.
Obviously, like Uber's kind of super close to the launch phase. So like a lot of these questions that they left up in the air are now answered, because they were asking things like, um depended on if it sounded like a bumblebee versus if it sounded closer to a helicopter in terms of noise level, if it was like kind of flying lower versus if it was flying at a higher altitude, if they were flying mostly during the day, if they were flying mostly during at night. And like obviously things kind of shifted based on like how much is this going to impact me, and how safe do I think it is to even like civilians on the ground if you are flying at a lower altitude. So it kind of like again ebbed and flowed in the way that you would expect. And obviously like price was another main issue for people, because this is not I have problems with an Uber X like price like at the right time of night.
Mm-mm.
That's
And
not
the right amount of traffic, like, oh my goodness,
oh
these ride sharing apps play. They play all day because, and people are constantly worried about dynamic pricing, making it into a lot of the like consumer goods that we purchase, and they absolutely should be. Do not bring that shit to my local grocery store. But I also just like they're already trying dynamic pricing with ride sharing, and I hate it. I absolutely hate it, which is why I'm like, don't bring this shit into anything else. Actually.
How could a company go out of their way to ever make something more affordable for you? If you are seeing something that you love or something that you use being like put up as like dynamic pricing as an option, you need to grab your like pitchfork, like no shade, and start and hit the streets, because it will get worse. Like,
Oh,
and that's why
literally.
even though I can understand the initial like taste for affordability, I think Uber is going to pull the same game they pulled with the cars, where they tried to make it incredibly affordable, and they tried to like kind of bully like their way into like the taxi business. Waited until like taxis were weekend and was like, actually, this Uber $120. Like, and like no lie, I've actually seen a Uber that high. I had to split that with like Loki 6 people. We were in there like a clown car.
No, it's definitely up in the air, but as we've seen in the past, could go very badly.
Yeah, and I think yeah, safety ended up being the biggest concern. Mexico City kind of had the highest safety rating, but again, it goes back to the idea that like they already kind of use that mode of transportation more than others, and even then, it was like at 54%. So
Mhm.
it still really wasn't the best. But I mean, all those things could be worked on. Like right now, it's not giving a total no, but it's definitely kind of in that midpoint when it comes to people and accepting that new technology.
For sure. And that always is incredibly high in terms of what you need to consider when you're going to pilot something. You can take the smartest people in the world with the best technologies, but if nobody is ever going to use it, well, then you've kind of already failed from step one. And I think another interesting question that gets brought up in this debate, and we've already touched on it a bit, is just like, how is this going to be viewed from like a who is this accessible for already? Like, even if they do make the pricing accessible, is this still just going to be seen as another passion project for the elite? Is it just going to be seen as another thing of like rich billionaires jetting from like Cabo to like Tijuana or something like that? And like, who knows? Or maybe is debuting it with very affordable pricing going to get more because if it's, for example, already in your app interface on Uber, like, hey, want to try an eVTOL? Maybe people are going to go for it and more people are going to get hooked on it than you realize.
Yeah, for sure. I even thought the same thing about Waymo. I think when I first started, like when I was like using rideshare app one time, and I literally saw like I don't know if it was like a DoorDash or Uber Eats or whatever, and it was like had pre-clicked like it's okay for a Waymo to deliver my order. And I unclicked that so fast, but hey, like it's kind of like yeah, kind of already integrating in it for you. I think that that is definitely something that they're going to have to work on a lot in marketing, and because I think people, especially when it comes to something so, not to be biased, obviously unnecessary, when it for like a person to person, like point one to point B, like non EMS use, like they're seeing it as a point of the elite. Like that was one of the main issues in the survey, is that people had concerns about inequity when it came to who was going to actually have access to these vehicles, because the community as a whole, in terms of noise pollution and all of these other concerns, are going to is going to take a hit. But at like, to the benefit of whom? Like, and I think a lot of people already have negative like perceptions of who that's going to be benefiting.
For sure. Community buy in is essential. And I wonder, at least from everything I've seen, a lot of this seems to be coming from the industry, the government, and these startups themselves. But I haven't necessarily seen any sort of like grassroots push. And honestly, we can even do a case study of a city that already kind of has to deal with this, but just on a different scale. Like New York has so many noise complaints that come from the helicopters all the time across all the different bureaus. And I feel like this could go either way, because this could go in favor of the adoption of eVTOLs since they are a lot quieter, but they are also still space consuming. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's definitely up in the air because they're a lot quieter, so they're better than helicopters in that sense. But some of the traditional kind of drawbacks are still there, of inequity, of infrastructure, of certification that we've kind of covered. And just to kind of give a summary once again, because helicopters are eVTOL's direct competition, um, there are some things that one is better at, some things that another is better at, but yeah.
Like you said, I think they definitely win when it comes to sound. And it was even shown in the survey that, like, if the sound was closer to a quote unquote bumblebee than a helicopter, people obviously had a better public perception of it. However, like the frequency was another thing that they toyed with in the different scenarios. And like, I feel like if they're trying to market this to like a larger audience and not the upper echelon in a city as population dense as like New York City, then we always also have to put that into consideration, because like unfortunately accessibility might actually be something that people like, might be a double-edged sword for some people, in terms of like how often are they going to be hearing that annoying quote unquote bumblebee sound. And also, like, again, with that accessibility, I think they also went over helicopters with just being less expensive because of their simpler design. So you're able to like manufacture and operate them and maintain them at a lower price. But again, like, the frequency, the noise pollution, and and the fact that we don't necessarily currently have the infrastructure for that might also be a point of contention.
For sure. Another thing that eVTOLs have that we didn't touch on earlier when going into the physics, but this is more from, I guess, like the engineering design perspective, there is increased safety simply because they're actually removing lots of points of failures by having more rotors and backup power sources. And what I mean by that is traditional helicopters will kind of have one, or I think at best two power sources, and they obviously have just the rotors that are at the top. With eVTOLs having multiple different branched arms, multiple different propulsion systems, if one fails, there's another to give backup power, which allows for a safe landing, which with helicopters we know is not the case. And so there's definitely a push to use that for, what do you call it, because of that increased safety. But once again, we flip back to the other side of the tennis court because helicopters are still outperforming eVTOLs for specific functions. For example, emergency medical services, because they just have a greater payload range combination, which payload is literally just the amount of weight that is on board, like how much can it hold. And then range is just obviously how far can it travel. The more payload you have, the less you can travel, because the more like weight and energy that it takes to get to wherever you're going. But obviously, when we're thinking about transporting cargo, when we're thinking about medevac, when we're thinking about all of these things, that kind of needs a reliable route, like a reliable method of transportation. eVTOLs, like they're still kind of a little punching, a little bit above their weight class because they're still trying to figure out that battery issue that I touched on earlier. But in general, pros and cons with for both helicopters and eVTOLs, and in general, an exciting form of technology when we're starting to think about what does urban air mobility look like, and what do other methods of transportation look like, and in an ever growing world. I think that I forgot the statistic, but it's just like a very high percentage of the world's population lives in cities nowadays, and that's another thing to consider. So as the world gets more and more metropolitan, like how are we going to come up with ways to get people where they need to go?
Yeah, and like it's difficult for me. I do think I came into even reading about eVTOLs and like their space in our communities and in our current social sphere negatively. And what I read didn't necessarily sway me in the way that I kind of wish it did. Like, I feel like for the majority of its uses and what Uber is honestly trying to probably get it to do, which is again more of that like person to person, point A to point B usage, and the fact that they had such like a emphasis on like beating the gridlock traffic and things like that. I'm just kind of like, what's the point? Like, obviously, I love if there's other options for things like EMS for agriculture, but it seems like what integrating eVTOLs into society would demand is really not worth what they can currently give in like any kind of near future. And I think that I'm kind of tired of that. Like, I feel like there's a lot of things, especially in the US specifically, if I'm just specifically speaking for the United States, where we pour a lot of money into helping a very, very small population that probably needs the least help, which is upper middle class people who live in urban cities who don't want to drive through the traffic. Like, that's why I'm just like, we're talking
Fair
about
enough.
building these like landing ports on top of buildings and doing all of these things, and things that we probably like, these hidden factors that we as a society aren't even sure about, talk less like the ugliness visually, the noise pollution, and all of these other things. I'm just like, what is the point? Like,
I feel
again,
like, oh, I
wait, go
was gonna
ahead.
say, to your point of like all the effort that it takes to make a new solution, sometimes I'm like, the time, energy that we're doing to do this thing, to have like a subset of a consumer base, why don't we just improve public transportation? Like, I feel like with
Thank
every new
you.
method of transportation, it always raises the question of like, okay, but why don't we just improve public transit? Is that just not a better use of everyone's time? I mean, I'm like, when I think about it from a cost savings perspective, a time savings perspective, and it's proven that it's not even, I know a lot of people try to associate it with like lower class activities, but it's actually proven that across multiple different countries, like the wealthy or the elite will use public transportation if they think it's worth their time. Like, if they think that it's going to be a better solution than the other things that are currently available. So I just feel like sometimes it just feels like we're over engineering a solution, like trying to come up with all of these new fancy things, but not necessarily like what could be best, what could be easiest. And oftentimes the solution that can be the best is not always the fanciest solution. Like sometimes the thing that helps to cure malaria truly is just vaccines and malaria, mosquito nets. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be some ultra fancy sonic zapper, blah 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 that you're gonna sell for $500. And I feel like even though the technology is very cool, it feels like we're stepping into like a cool futuristic movies of like, oh, I get into my eVTOL, I land, I go into the party. Like, I think that's very cool, and I would like to see it be adopted one day. But if you ask me, I also want better public transportation, and maybe we can parallel path these things. I don't think that technological innovation needs to stop just because inequity exists in society. That's always going to happen inevitably, but I do feel like, better uses of our resources, and also the logistics are just crazy to me. Like the logistics in terms of how to actually integrate, at least at this stage, and maybe in 5 or 10 years I'll be eating my words, but I'm just like, where are you guys going to find the space for this? Like, that to me is the biggest like issue of like how this is going to become a technology. Where are we literally finding the space for these things to land? How are you guys going to coordinate, like as they ramp up, for example, with the FAA or other air traffic controllers, to make sure that they're not flying directly in anybody's airspace? I think those are the two main things where I'm just kind of like, who's going to be overseeing that? Whose job is it that to like find out? Because you can't push that onto the consumers. So who's it going to be?
You can't push that onto these consumers, girl. They pushing that onto the taxpayers. Like in my head, as someone who loves logic and loves efficiency,
Mhm.
seeing this being entertained does irritate me because at the end of the day, like I know that like capitalistic hunger is going to make y'all want to go towards something like this instead of actually trying to connect the American cities and pour taxpayer money into trying to make like a high-speed rail or something. And
Mhm.
even though like these businesses privatize everything, I promise you, when they want this to end up having some kind of expansion, they're going to be going to Uncle Sam begging for $1. And guess who's
No,
going to have to
literally.
give it to them? Us. And I'm
No,
tired of that
literally.
because I would have rather had like my money go to something that matters more. Like we're already seeing what is going on in the data with the data centers, where when they run into problems, we pay for it. Like when they run into, like, I'm not even talking about financially, but even as a society, from our environment, from our health, like we pay for these large conglomerates when they want to come and start playing and doing whatever in our backyard. And I'm over it. Like the only positive thing that I will leave, like, just this conversation with when it comes to like an eVTOL is the idea that at the end of the day, as a STEM girly, I'm going to support innovation and technology. And even if this ends up not being it and this is not the solution, it's not. I would still be grateful for the fact that we do have this technology. We are like moving forward in modes of transportation. And if even if they don't help today, they may help in the future. Even if they don't help at all, they may inform another technology that might. So like I'm always going to be a fan of innovation, but I do think, guys, like let's be a little serious.
Fair enough. No, I think in 2021, NASA published a white paper talking about eVTOLs, and they kind of emphasized in that paper that the best modes of what do you call it, how they think it would actually be, or like start to be adopted into society, would be kind of consumer, consumer facing, consumer, what do you call it? Or things to help consumers. And so they focused a lot, once again, on emergency medical services and cargo shipping and stuff like that. And I think that is where I see a lot of the benefits of this technology of how can we directly make people's lives better in a way that is efficient, in a way that is cost saving and time saving, and in a way that is easily integratable into current transportation networks. And I feel like EMS, and cargo are some of the biggest ways. Also, I think agriculture is actually underplayed in this conversation. I haven't seen as many people talk about it, but I feel like the crop dusting capabilities, especially when we're thinking about short-term flight over a farm, I think that there's so many different ways that it can be applied. So I am very optimistic because I feel like any learnings that we get from this can, as Gold said, once again be used for this current technology or be implemented into others. People have already been talking about how eVTOLs, like they've been taking some of the like learnings from eVTOLs and bringing them to helicopters to make helicopters more efficient and better at their job. So I think there's nothing wrong with trying to see how much better we can be with something. There's always growth for improvement, but let's also make sure that while we're chasing the future, we're not neglecting, what's going on in the real world. But very cool though. And maybe one day you're gonna catch the BS girlies in an eVTOL. So stay tuned for that. But with
Hell
that,
yeah,
it's
stay
time to
tuned.
get into everybody's favorite section, bits of BS. Gold, do you want to go first or do you want me to go first?
Yeah, and in case this is your first episode, this is just us going back into mostly our college days and discussing like some crazy, funny, just weird story that we remember as like we're just wading through that BS trying to get our actual BS. And obviously this episode made me think of physics, literally
Mhm.
cold shiver down my spine. And I just thought about like my like physics like lab professors for my physics courses and how odd he was. Like he
Mhm.
literally was the type of physics teacher that you would see on social media, like standing on his head and spinning 3 times so he literally caught on fire. I remember he was doing this thing where like he was like mixing something and then something would pop and it would literally shoot out into the crowd and like every time I saw him do this, I'm like, it was such a like a high velocity that I was like, this could actually hurt somebody, and you're in my face with them big little just glasses just keying, and I'm like, what is the deal with physics professors? Like he did multiple odd things and sometimes dangerous things in class, and I'm like, Who is in charge of making sure this man like doesn't take somebody's eye out? Like I remember when that thing popped, the way I like literally actually ducked, like I was like, whoa.
The literal definition of a mad scientist. Like he said, I'm finna do what I want at any. And you know, it's always funny to see the quirky professors because they're really just like they're really just here to have fun. They're really just here to have a time. But you know what? I will allow physics foolery if y'all are as fine as young Albert Einstein. No, I did not let that go. And I'm still thinking of that photo. Shout out to him. Um,
You know,
but
I'll
okay,
allow it. Okay, you can be quirked up if you look like that.
no, you said you just see what I'm saying. But next episode about pretty privilege. LOL, I'm just joking. But what do you call it? Okay, my bit of VS, and you gonna kill me because it's another wholesome one. But it made me, or not even wholesome. It's more so. You know what? I will say it's speaking to the climate of the technological innovations that are spreading through our society right now. Because in Gold, I think you guys probably had this on your campus, but we had the little like autonomous delivery bots that would like deliver like food and like all of these different things. And I know that they've been like spreading across college campuses like wildfire. The first time I ever saw one wasn't even at my school, but and I remember it threw me all the way off. And then obviously like it became so common that I'm trying to remember their name. I can't remember their name, but they used to be all over campus doing deliveries. I don't think I ever personally got one because obviously there's an added delivery fee, and campus is just not big enough for me to like put on the ad. Like, let me just get my steps in, okay? But I remember like one time it got like stuck or something on the path, and I was walking to like one of my classes, and these two girls like helped to like pull it off or something like that, and then like get it back on the path. And I just remember feeling so maternal, Gold. Like I literally felt so maternal, so sad. And like, listen, are you gonna say, guys, Ilyana is humanizing technology again? Yes, I am. But I every time I saw them struggling to cross the street or getting stuck, like I just felt so bad. Oh my god! Like I literally would be like, my heart, like whole time it's literally wires in a circuit board. But
No, like I catch myself doing that, or even like actually trying to see a Waymo get through Atlanta traffic and realize that this is not a game. But then I catch myself like, you're a job stealer. Yeah. And now you're stuck in mud. Yeah.
LOL, please. LOL, not the proletariat. But you know, I did not know there were Waymo shooters, but apparently there are. Like, I met
Really?
somebody who was a Waymo shooter. I was like, that's so interesting. She was
Oh.
very, like, going at it, or like, not anything crazy, but you could tell she was very passionate and, like, very pro Waymo. And I was just like, you got it, girl. I've never been in one. Maybe one day. We'll see.
Being a Waymo shooter is spiritually redacted, and that's all I'm gonna say on that. Like,
All we're gonna say for now, as always, you know, where we had a good time filming this episode. This was a fun one. Make sure to check the required reading if you want to see some of the videos of these things actually taking flight, because it's pretty cool. Required reading is great because we have all of our sources linked down below and just interesting stuff that we think it would be cool for you guys to go over, and obviously like check our sources, you know. As always, you can email us or reach out to us on socials if you want to talk more about what we discussed today. And also if you have any episode ideas, because listen, Gold and I be trying to comb through the woods to try to figure out what we want to talk about. But if y'all have specific topics that you want us to research, we're definitely down to do that too. But with all of that, we'll see you guys in the next one. Remember to remain curious, remain educated, and remain critical. Bye!
bye.